When it comes to those who have dealt with mood disorder, depression, anxiety, depersonalization, even more niche disorders like bipolar, schizophrenia, there's a burning inquiry in all of us as to whether or not we will always deal with this issue. And I'm not specifically referring to being in an acute clinical depression forever, but once you're depressed or you've been clinically depressed before, is it something you'll have to look forward to the rest of your life? Is there such a thing as true recovery? This is something we all think about. I've thought about it. My guess is you've thought about it if you've clicked on this video, or at least you know someone that's thought about it. And it's a fair question just by nature of how painful and how scarring mood disorders can be. So my name is Noah, and I'm going to dive into this question very briefly here. Well, we'll see how briefly. Because it comes up a lot. People message me a lot. It's an anxiety that many of us have, myself included. As it pertains to this video, I had a big breakdown in 2011. My subs are probably tired of hearing me say that, but for anyone that's new, I had a breakdown in 2011, led to clinical depression, anxiety, depersonalization, suicidal ideations, hospitalizations, many treatments, including shock, and a lot of therapy. And I have since overcome the depression, but I wouldn't say that I'm the same person I was prior to the depression, and I'll try to explain. I remember when I first got depressed, I sort of touched on this in the video in the past. I remember thinking, like, someday I'll go back to being exactly how I once was. That was like the dream. And it was very elusive because you kind of never go back to exactly the way you were because you've been through a trauma and you can't unlive that trauma. You can't forget. It's just too deeply rooted in you, that experience. If you had a true clinical depression, so this bypasses situational, in my opinion. This bypasses a passing blue mood, being sad, down, having some anxiety over something that's happening in your life. I'm talking about clinical. You can't forget it. And so when you are blessed enough to come out of your depression, there is this sense of weariness in you about it coming back. And to what degree that disturbs you and affects how you behave, it's sort of individual. It's just sort of based on a lot of things. One of which is your support team, your self-awareness. Like, do you accept that you've been depressed? Do you accept that it is something you're going to have to look out for? And are you going to modify your life to fit that reality? Or are you going to throw caution to the wind and behave in a way that might be considered a bit dangerous or reckless when it comes to keeping you mentally stable? It's just something we all have to deal with. We have to face. You know, I personally do better just identifying myself within my heart as someone who has been seriously depressed and must always live a lifestyle and maintain, a structure that plays towards the possibility that it could return. Not to be obsessed with it returning, but not to pretend that it couldn't. 50% of people that have had a clinical depression will unfortunately have to deal with another one. So in that respect, for some of us, I think you get true remission as opposed to true recovery. Not all of us will be so fortunate as to have a bad episode and then never have another one again. Most of us will deal with another one, or at least half rather. And once you've dealt with a second one, there's a 75% chance you're going to deal with a third one. And that can be really scary, and that's something that really upsets me and freaks me out. Because it makes me feel like trapped, like I have no say. But the longer I think about it, and the more I reflect on my experience and the experience that I have witnessed in others, we do have some say. And recovery or remission, mostly focusing on the concept of remission, being in remission from your depressive illness, your anxiety, your DP, whatever you face, it can be long-lasting and it can be very powerful, re-energizing, and it can make life worth living. It can refuel you for when you may or may not slip back down that rabbit hole. Now, I do know people that have had one and never had it again so far, and that's amazing. And I hope that's your story. But I don't want you to be afraid of the next one to the point where you're debilitated and you can't focus on the fact that you may be in recovery right now, living between a breakdown. I'll tell you a story. There's a man I know who had his first depressive illness when he was like 23. It was real bad, lasted about a year, nearly took him out, but it didn't. And when he came out of it, he was sort of in denial about the fact that it happened. And he didn't accept that about himself. He sort of wanted to brush it under the carpet and just pretend it wasn't a real thing. And so he continued to do the things he always did. And I harp on this because I just think it's so important that self-care, lifestyle, habits, they revolve around keeping you mentally healthy. And this man didn't do that. And so at age 29, maybe 30, he had his second episode, and it was real bad. And like most people in the midst of the episode, he couldn't see past his pain and he almost committed suicide. He thought he wasn't going to make it. But after that episode, when he did recover, go into remission rather, he finally started to realize that there were certain things he was going to have to change. He was going to have to start treating himself like someone who has a history of mental illness and live a lifestyle that's healthy and that's conducive towards maintaining mental health. One that we should all live in an ideal world. But those who deal with depression, anxiety, depersonalization, we just have less slack. Our fuse is shorter. And so he finally did. And his time in remission increased. At age 40, I think, 10 years later, he had another mental breakdown. It was a bad one. And it was very sad. And he survived it, but it was another year of his life that he spent in the midst of a mood disorder, which is haunting and horrifying. And he was very brave through the fight, and he overcame it. And he worked even harder on educating himself about his condition and what he can do to stay in remission. He is now 58 years old, and he's not had another episode of major depression. Now, has he had some ups and downs? Yes. Has he dealt with some dysthymia? Yes. But he's been almost in recovery for 18 years after having had multiple mental breakdowns, full clinical depressions. And that fact alone brings me hope. It brings me a sense of peace that if I can keep working, maybe I can get that sort of lasting recovery. And my experience has been that the longer I am in recovery, the longer I work towards being depression-free and just doing everything I can, controlling the things I can, which is so important for all of us, the more at peace I feel about the idea that there's a future for me. Because, if I just sat here thinking, nope, I'm going to always be depressed forever and just obsessing over that fact, I don't know how long I'd last. I have to believe that if guys like my friend, who I'm just going to leave nameless, if he can go through multiple very bad episodes and now be in the best stretch of his whole life, why can't any of us, And like I said, some of us won't ever have to go there. The purpose of this video, the hope of this video is that while we all will strive to stay in remission as long as we can, you never want to forget. You don't ever want to close the door on that experience, because if we forget what happened to us, we might forget how important it is that we fight to maintain our mental health. I think fighting for mental health is the most important thing any of us can ever possibly do. So to answer the question, if you've been depressed once, will you always be depressed? No, I don't believe you'll always be depressed, but I believe you'll always be more vulnerable, and you'll always need to treat yourself a little extra carefully, and you'll always have to take that side of your life a little more serious than, let's say, the more fortunate, mentally stable people of this world. Is there such a thing as true recovery? There is, but it might not look exactly like you think it's going to look. That doesn't mean it's not there and it's not worth fighting for. Leave your comments below. Share with me your experience. Share with me what you think on this topic. I adore learning from you guys, and I look forward to reading them, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Again, my name is Noah. Take good care of yourselves.